in Strasbourg, the European Parliament, for this very important debate with the members of the European Parliament on the future of the European Union. For us, it is very important to know the German position on the most important issues on the future of our Union. We know the position of the European Parliament, we know the position of the European Commission, but for paving the way for a better Europe, we need to change Europe, but it should be a big mistake to destroy Europe. We want to be European also in the next years. The European Parliament wants more power. We are the only one European institution elected directly by the citizens. On the budget, we want to decide before the European election. We want to increase the budget from 1.1 to 1.3. We want own resources. On immigration, the other important issue, we want to cooperate with the Council. We want to achieve good solution on Dublin reform. It is possible to achieve an agreement before the end of this year. And also, if we want to achieve good solution on immigration, we need to invest more in Africa. We need a plan for Africa. We need more money in Africa against climate change, against terrorism, against poverty, in favour of growth. Not a new colonisation, but a new modern cooperation between Europe and Africa. For this we need also a European foreign policy with a European defence. This is very important for us, this is very important for the future of the European Union. Thank you, Chancellor, for being here, and you have the floor. È aperto il catch the eye. The catch the eye is open.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident.
President of the European Parliament, dear Antonio Tajani, President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, ladies and gentlemen, members of the European Parliament, commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. Over 50 years ago, Walter Hallstein, the German president at the time, described European unification as an exemplary experiment. And this was 10 years before the first direct elections to the European Parliament. At that time, the European community was still in its infancy. A lot of the achievements, such as Sherman, the internal market, were visionary projects. But the foundations had been laid, and hundreds of years of wars and dictatorships for the citizens of Europe were over, and for the first time they had a stable and peaceful future ahead of them. Today I'm here with joy, but also with gratitude in front of the greatest parliament of the world. We have 751 members from 28 countries representing over 500,000 people, approximately 7% of the world's population. In this House, we feel the heart of democracy beating. carried out by 28 countries, and this describes something which is so important about Europe, its diversity. This is one of the greatest strengths of us in Europe, because despite our diversity, we have a commitment to unity, to compromise. Despite our different origins, despite our different opinions, what we are doing here is to come to results which are to the benefit of our community. It's a year since I last spoke to this House. In 2007, Germany took over the presidency of the Council. I talked at that time about the diversity which brings us together, which does not separate us, about the peace which we have to defend, about the fact that we in Europe need to breathe good air. I talked about freedom and diversity being connected in Europe. I spoke about tolerance. I also mentioned the fact that tolerance is the soul of Europe. It is an indispensable basic value for we Europeans. And last year we have experienced how much the world has changed. And we have experienced also how the soul of Europe is being affected. The global, political, economic and technological challenge which we have to face are moving forward at a more and more rapid pace. We have experienced a series of crises. We have experienced international terrorism, violent armed conflicts and migration movements which have had a serious impact on us in Europe. And of course, digital progress has considerably changed our lifestyles. We are experiencing the results of climate change, and we are seeing our values called into question. The United Kingdom is a country which is soon going to leave the European Union, and this is a deep wound. And I think that turning now to Michel Barnier here for the work that he has done, I think that we can all applaud him for it. Dear members of the European Parliament, we are all realizing that it is very difficult, ever more difficult, to balance development, but also we are experiencing the fact that it's becoming more and more difficult to speak alone on the global stage, to push our interests forwards, and thus it becomes even more important that we stand side by side as Europeans, and thus the European Union, more than ever, needs to respect both the interests of its own members and of others. We need to understand that tolerance is the soul of Europe, that it is an essential component of what makes us Europeans, and that only together with you can we develop to ensure that we also take account of the interests and needs of others as well as of our own. And that brings us to the core of European solidarity, without which we cannot be successful. And this solidarity is based on tolerance, and it represents our strength as Europeans, which we can find nowhere else. There are three reasons for this. First of all, solidarity is a universal value. We have to work for each other. It is an essential prerequisite for every operation, for families, for villages, for sports associations, as well as for a community such as the European Union. Solidarity is a component of the European Treaty. It is a central feature of our values. It is a cornerstone of Europe. It supports economic development and also helps us combat youth unemployment. We are faced either with terrorist attacks or other attacks on our values. We had the European crisis, the so-called umbrella, which was to cover us and help us and help to solve our financial problems. We have a few examples here which demonstrate how individual countries of the European Union and citizens of the European Union are in difficulties, but they do not stand alone. So we have a few examples of this, but on the other side of the coin, we have national issues which always have an impact on the community as a whole. Therefore, secondly, solidarity is always linked to commitments of the community. And the principles based on the rule of law in my country, the rights of the opposition and civil society are adversely affected if press freedom is curtailed. But state based on the rule of law and the rule of law in general is something which is not just national, but is for all of us throughout Europe. For Europe, of course, can only operate properly as a community which is based on law and when those laws are applied. If individually we try to deal with our problems, then we compromise the strength and stability of our euro, because our common currency can only work properly if each individual member shares the responsibility. Who actually tries to jeopardize the agreement of Europe on individual issues, for example, human rights policies or others, is adversely affecting the entire European foreign policy. And Europe can only be a voice to the world if it works together. And that means that solidarity always means that we have to overcome national egoism. And I am well aware of this. I am from Germany, and I know that this has not always been the case. For example, in the years before 2015, we took far too long to realize that the issue of refugees was an issue for the whole of Europe and not just for Germany. And in order to understand this, we have to realize that this is a common European task. And thirdly, using solidarity for everybody means that we have to deal with our own interests with a view to others. We have to respect others, but this is not something that contradicts looking after our own interests, quite to the contrary. For example, we need to work to combat migration problems with third countries. This is an issue which Mr. Tajani just brought up. We have to, at the same time, ensure that people on the spot have their living conditions improved, because it is often because of difficult conditions at home that they flee towards Europe. Now, looking at climate change, this has economic and social consequences. It is crucial that we tackle this. It's useful for Europe if industry and threshold countries produce less greenhouse gas and our whole system becomes greener. But it is also important for all Europeans if they develop better stability within the Eurozone. It's useful for all Europeans if everybody participates in protection against climate change. It's going to help all Europeans if we tackle together those who are affected by immigration. Accepting refugees by different member states on the basis of their democratic development and their own histories has triggered off different reactions. Solidarity means that we should do absolutely our utmost to find a common approach to tackle this and other subsequent results, work together as a community. So, solidarity is a universal basic value. It is a responsibility for our community, and solidarity is also in our own interests, the interests of our well-being. So unity and determination are key for us. I would like to raise 3 issues which I feel are particularly important. First of all, foreign and security policy. As Europeans, we notice that we can defend our interests when we work together. Only a stronger Europe is going to be able to defend its values and interests worldwide. And the times when we could rely on others are past. This means that we as Europeans now have to really take our fate fully into our own hands if we want to defend our community. And that means that in the long term, we in Europe have to develop our foreign policy more. We need to think this through. We need to try and do without people working on their own behalf for the benefit of our citizens. I have suggested that we establish a European Security Council with changing presidencies of the member states where decisions can be taken more rapidly. We have to create a European intervention force so that we can tackle issues immediately on the ground. We have already achieved cooperation in the military sphere. That is good, and we are going to continue to support this. But what we should do, and this is really important if we look at the developments of the past years, we have to work on a vision of one day creating a real, true European army.
Ja,
Non
so
sapevo
ist es,
che ci
denn
fossero dei
Jean-Claude
lupi
Juncker
in
hat schon vor
quest'Aula.
4...
Okay. Jean-Claude Juncker, some years ago, already said that a common European army would show the world that there will never again be war in Europe. I'm not saying anything against NATO. Of course not. We can be a good supplement to NATO.
Aber liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
but colleagues, it would be a lot easier to cooperate with us if we have more than 160 different weapon systems and the US has only 50 or 60. And if we had, we realize that all the different instances need training and education. And if we could work together and pool our efforts together, then we could work together with NATO, with a European army.
und das schließt dann natürlich,
I'm really pleased about this. This is great. I'm annoying some people. I'm in a parliament.
Dazu gehört dann im Übrigen auch die gemeinsame Entwicklung.
So we need the common development of armament systems within Europe, and this, of course, means a difficult task for the Federal Republic of Germany, because we are going to have to develop also a common European arms exports policy. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now come on to the economic issues. This is the basis of our strength and is the prerequisite for our position in the world. Because if we're not economically strong, we're not going to be politically strong. And I am very pleased to have looked at Jean-Claude Juncker's plan, the investment fund, which has had a considerable impact over the past few years, and has 500 billion euros invested up until 2020. 350 are already in the pipeline, and a good program for better investment is something which is really important. We've been working on it for a long time, and I think we should be talking about this now. The 350 million are a real contribution to improving prosperity in Europe. And of course, to a stable Europe with well-being for its citizens also needs a stable economy. We need to develop our monetary policy better. We're working on a banking union. Germany and France have already made statements on this, and I think that we need to link very closely to the midterm MFF on this. We have to look at responsibility and control, a banking union, and then later a European insurance system. And this is something which is going to reduce the risks of national country governments, because, of course, what we're looking at here is something which is two sides of the same coin. But here, the European Council, at least Germany is on board, together with France, is going to be able to make more progress. We've had intensive discussions over the past few days on digital taxation, for example. You've participated in that, I know. Germany is not asking whether. We feel that this goes without saying, but the question is, how are we going to do this? And I think that what is important democratically is to take the comments of the Commission on board and to look at how, in an international context, we can also get an international solution. We are looking at minimum taxation, but if that doesn't work, we can't wait forever. We are going to have to work on it in Europe independently. If we're honest with ourselves, and if we look into the future and think about our lifestyle and well-being, we have to realize that it is not the same today as it was 100 or 150 years ago, that inventions always came from Europe. A lot of inventions and innovations now come from Asia and from the United States. And then, of course, we have to put the question to ourselves as to how, on our continent, we are going to determine the mobility of the future. We have to look at the fact that, for example, Chinese companies are investing in Germany. That's fine. But I want to make sure that we are stronger in Europe and that we want to be able to master the innovative technologies of the future. We have got the European instruments for this. We've got everything before us. We've got to look at quantum computing. We've got to look at the development of artificial intelligence. This is still possible because we have a strong industrial basis in Europe that we can build upon. We have to avail ourselves of that. Research and innovation are therefore central focal points for our future well-being. And the third area, colleagues, which I should like to refer to, is immigration and refugees. During our crisis, we had to overcome many hurdles and come to a common solution. But we've been successful in many areas, but the issue of immigration is something which has not yet brought Europe together as I would like it to. This is a real core topic, an issue which reflects our relationship with our neighbours, and we've got to find common approaches. We have made progress. We all agree that we need a European border protection force. But perhaps saying that we have a Schengen area with free movement and then start working on who comes in, who comes out, then we find out that we are infringing the principles of that once again. It's true that we've developed Frontex. The Commission's proposals, in my opinion, are good. But if everybody wants to retain their international responsibilities and doesn't want to give anything away, they can be as big, as good as they want to be, but they won't be able to do what they have to. We have to work on this together. And we also have to think through development aid, economic development, and how we can participate. They have excellent results compared to what we had 2 years ago, because individual member states with the Commission have been working in individual member states and have achieved more than they would do individually. I think we can learn a lot from that, but this is just part of the way down the road. And I think therefore, we also need to develop a common European asylum policy. If everybody takes decisions individually, then nobody can be surprised that countries from a particular country know about a certain country immediately, and then we get secondary migration. We have to make an effort to ensure that we have the same common playing field for the internal market, even on issues such as right to asylum and humanitarian responsibilities. We have to deal with these issues together. We have to have a common policy. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just given you 3 examples of many that I could have come up with. And the fact that I have really hit the nail on the head is demonstrated by the protest noises that I've been hearing. I think that what people want is that Europe really tackles these difficult problems, these burning problems. We need to tackle the issues which are facing us, but this doesn't mean that Europe has to be everywhere. Not every problem in Europe is a European problem. Solidarity means that Europe deals with things where it is necessary, and when it does so, it does that in a decisive, effective manner. I think Europe gives us our best chance to lasting peace, lasting well-being, and a safe and secure future. In Paris, at the invitation of the French presidency, when we think that the First World War came to an end 100 years ago, once again, we should think through what happens if countries don't have a respect for each other, and what happens if countries and the associations, the League of Nations in those days, collapses. And therefore, we should not give up our European opportunity, because if we do, we shall adversely affect not just ourselves, but the younger generation. Nationalism and egotism should no longer have a position in Europe. But tolerance and solidarity represent our common future. And, colleagues, it is well worth fighting for them. Thank you.
La parola ora, a nome della Commissione europea, al Presidente Jean-Claude.
And now I should like to call on Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the Commission.
Monsieur,
Serve un veterinario in quest'Aula, forse?
Do we perhaps need a vet here in the room?
Präsidentin, sehr verehrte
President, Chancellor, dear Angela, I am convinced of everything that you have said here is correct. I'm very impressed by all of the comments that you made. I'm just surprised that some people are not here to listen to what you've had to say. Standing ovations for the Chancellor are easy.
are speaking and saying the very same things. So thanks to this House to have discovered the same dignity of equal nations in Europe.
Monsieur le Président, aussi les commissaires sont beaucoup plus...
President, there are also a lot more commissioners here than there were for some of the other speeches as well.
Monsieur le Président,
President, I was very pleased to hear what you said about multilateralism. Multilateralism is one of the core values of the European Union, and what you said, it really goes to the heart of what the European Commission has been proposing. And I think there was a great deal of applause today, and a lot more than I got when I spoke in October 2014. And I think that history will prove you right. And not everyone here has always seen things that way, but you were quite right not to close the borders.
der CSU
there could be some more applause on that point than we've just heard. Now, on the issue of Brexit, we're swimming in the same water. I will just repeat that we do not want to punish the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom...
But I'm not swimming in that direction. I'm swimming exactly in the opposite direction. But
we have to respect the vote in the UK.
Best of it. In the interest of Britain, in the interest of the European Union. We are not in an aggressive mood when it comes to the future relations with Britain. The European Union, the continent, has to recognize that Britain, starting in 1939, was playing a major role when it came to the liberty and the freedom of this continent. We are grateful for that. But this is not the reason to leave the great history between the islands and the European Union. In fact, I do think that the leave is a tragedy, an historical error, a mistake, and we have to do the best out of it. And the European Commission, together with Michel Barnier, is moving into that direction. Was wichtig war,
what was important? I mean, of course, everything you said was important, but I was struck by what you said about Africa. Africa remains not a problem, but it is an issue for Africans. It's a great opportunity for Africans and for Europe. We need to work together in solidarity and friendship. The Commission has made proposals with regard to the external plan, and we should be building on those proposals. I appreciate everything that people say in favor of greater solidarity, but working with Africa is not charity. It is being part of a movement, but not wanting to do favors for Africa. We need a partnership with Africa between equals. Africa, it doesn't depend on us. We also depend on Africa. And so for that reason, we need to do more for Africa.
Also, alles in allem, Frau.
So, all in all, Chancellor, dear Angela, I think the comments that you've made really go to the heart of what we need to do. And perhaps there could be a little bit more support for all of the brave initiatives by the Commission on immigration, on Africa, on the Euro reform. And if you do even more than you have until now, you will be even greater than you are, and we would welcome that.
Procedo adesso alla chiusura del sistema per la registrazione elettronica.
I'm now going to close the system of electronic voting requests for Catch the Eye. So now we're going to have the intervention of the different leaders of the political groups. First of all, Manfred Weber on behalf of the European People's Party.
Chancellor, President, ladies and gentlemen, if I could quote, the unity of Europe was the dream of not very many people. It was a hope and expectation for very many. And now it's necessary for all of us. This was Konrad Adenauer, the first Chancellor of Germany, who said this. And there is a very large portrait of Konrad Adenauer in your office, Chancellor Merkel. And he realized just how important the history of Germany, history of Europe is, and realized that things would only go well for Germany if there were these links with their neighbors. And the very pro-European stance of the current Chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Kohl. On the basis of that, we've been able to do things which were unthinkable, perhaps, and a lot has been achieved. I'm 46 years old, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm one of the first generation on this continent that has been able to live in peace and freedom. And you belong to a generation that was also able to live in peace, but for a considerable length of your time, you were locked in behind the Iron Curtain. My grandfather was part of the war generation, so the unthinkable has actually managed to be achieved thanks to the German contribution, and I would like to send out heartfelt thanks to you, Mrs. Merkel, as the Chancellor on behalf of Germany. So we're thinking in terms of the work that has to be done today. Thank you very much for stressing the fact that being pro-European means that you perceive the problems that others are having. And if you take a look at the euro crisis, we know that in Germany you explained what the internal market means and you demanded solidarity with other countries. And then when it comes to the situation in Ukraine, when Russia changed the borders through military actions, the first time since the Second World War, you said that the Europeans have to stand together and give a firm reply, and that breaches of international law cannot be accepted. And then in the summer, in another speech, we said that it's not possible to close borders on a unilateral basis. You have to discuss these issues with the neighbors, with your neighbors. And in order to come over problems on the basis of partnership, this is what you always preach, and I'd like to say thank you to you for that. But obviously, we're facing very many challenges, and perhaps I could say something when it comes to the method, not refer specifically to the content. In Europe, we need to have a new will to assume responsibility. If you take a look at the Council of Ministers, we know that the ministers that always vote in favour, very high rate, over 90%, but when they get back home, they start protesting. And I think we have to stop this game of apportioning blame. For example, in Spain, they don't know any really anti-European kind of movement, but that is because during the times of crisis, Mr. Rajoy, who was Prime Minister at the time, didn't point the finger at Brussels. He said that the Spaniards, that we have to take responsibility for our country, we have to do our homework, so we really have to stop pointing the finger, shoving the responsibility on Brussels when things go wrong in our countries. We have to recognize success stories. We've had very many people standing at the podium who've talked about the success stories in their own countries in terms of the economy. European Union is on that path as well. We have to stress the initiatives taken by the European Commission under Jean-Claude Juncker, and it's thanks to these initiatives that we are being successful. But we have to get the people of Europe behind us. If we're talking about methods and methodology, then, colleagues, I think Brexit has shown us that this whole argument, I want to have my sovereignty back, it works. It's very fruitful. And I think we do need a new approach. We have to take a look at this. We have to build a bridge between the decision-making process and the people. And it's not only a question of having the Franco-German axis, but we all have to work together. And this represents the European political map. It's Theresa from Greece, we've got the EPP, we've got the Front National in France, we've got all the political parties, movements represented here. And when we take decisions, when we discuss issues at the heart of European democracy, then it has to have consequences. And only a few months ago, we were talking about various issues. We know, of course, that negotiations are going to be difficult in the future, and we have to take these kind of decisions across parties and show decisiveness across parties, that we're an important chamber, but we don't have the right of initiative. We know, of course, that the Lisbon Treaty is a major task. You know that I have been appointed Spitzenkandidat on behalf of my political group, and if I were to become President of the Commission, then I would also want to ensure that there is indirect initiative, right of initiative of the European Parliament, so the European Parliament does get the right of initiative and has its say. Honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, as a final point, Europe needs ambition. I grew up in the 1990s when Helmut Kohl was Chancellor of Germany, and he said we will do away with the Deutschmark and introduce the euro, which wasn't at all popular at the time. But he went ahead with this. He did this because he believed in the future. He thought several decades ahead of his time, and I'm extremely grateful to that, and for also what you have said when it comes to the common foreign and security policy. If we follow the European path, if we also move away from unanimity to qualified majority, then the European Union will not only become a political giant, we'll be able to turn our European Union into I'll correct myself. We're not only an economic giant, which we already are, but we'll become a political giant. And we'll get, in order to be able to properly represent our values. So thank you very much, and thank you for everything you've done under your chancellorship.
Per il gruppo socialista la parola all'onorevole Udo Bull.
From the Socialist Group now, the floor is to Udo Bullmann.
Ein herzliches Willkommen.
Chancellor, welcome also from the Social Democrat Group here in the Parliament, the House of European Democracy. I'd like to ask colleagues for understanding that when the Chancellor is here to speak to us, I want to spend a moment talking about Germany before we move on. It was very impressive to see what happened in the past few days, with how much dignity we paid tribute to the victims of the First World War in Germany, in France, in the UK, in Belgium, all of the locations where people see the traces of this tragic war. And I'd just like to add one point. In Germany, we're also thinking about the brave men and women that 100 years ago went against an order, the uprising of naval forces who refused to enter the battles and led to the end of the First World War, an important point of democracy in German history, one that we can be very proud of and that perhaps we don't focus on enough. The revolution in 1880, the speeches by Otto Wels in 1933, that spoke out against Hitler, and the 17th of July in 53 in the GDR, and also the peaceful revolution in 1989, which was a milestone in your own personal life. And what I want to say is that as Germans we have to be aware of how closely our history is entwined with European history. And there is one thing that we should pay particular attention to. We cannot fail. And that we, Germans, and I say this as a German social democrat, do not have the right to fail on Europe, much less than this obligation is even greater on us than in any other country, given our history. And that's why any hesitation or lack of courage can take us down the wrong road. Perhaps I could just give an example so that you see exactly what I mean, Chancellor. No one here has any doubts about your conviction of the importance of Europe. But I think that German expectations are even greater. Make sure that you use your voice to strengthen Europe. I think that is the expectation of Europeans of Germany. I think it's true in economic and also in political terms, and is very much part of the debate that we're having of Europe. Let me just recall something which happened recently. President Barroso from your family said that in order to overcome the economic crisis we have to have common initiatives, and what happened under pressure from you and from Mr. Schäuble led to the Troika, and we've had a lot of debates about why the outcomes were not positive in a lot of respect, because there was no democratic control, there was no control by the Parliament, and that is something that we certainly must change. And I would like us to draw two consequences as quickly as possible. And I would like to ask for your support on this. First of all, the community method needs to be strong. Only when the European Parliament has a true voice will we be successful in the future. And then secondly, we have a coalition agreement in Berlin because we want Europe to be strong, and we need to ensure that this is implemented. That's for the European Monetary Fund, and also Germany needs to make progress on climate protection and in social policy, for instance, in the framework for decent working commissions. We need to make sure that it is not blocked by the EPP, but that we can make Europe's position on precarious work very clear. And in recent days, we don't know exactly what the EPP is in favor of. Is it the EPP of Commission President Juncker? And I think this is going to be a problem for Manfred Weber. Or is it the EPP of the political speeches, or is it the EPP of President Kurz, who is currently turning his back on the migration pact of the United Nations, which I think is scandalous. And having an impact on the border, or is it the party of Mr. Orban speaking out against what are the principles of this party of Adenauer and Schuman? What is their political discourse? We should invest all efforts to help Europe to move forward a fair Europe of solidarity in which everyone has opportunities. And for the men and women in my group, Europe is not just a place on the map. It's a question of our convictions. It's tolerance. And I'd like to thank you and wish us all the best for our work, because there's still a great deal to be done.
Per il gruppo dei conservatori e dei riformisti.
Now, on behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists Group, Mr. Legutko has the floor.
Chancellor, it's a privilege for us to have you here. You are certainly one of those politicians that has had decisive influence on what has been going on in Europe, and not only as a leader of a very important nation, but also as a remarkable personality. But precisely because of your exceptional status, I'm taking the liberty of sharing with you some of my concerns that I have about the European Union. You are a very powerful person. You make the basic decisions in Europe. You anoint people for top positions within the EU. Even here in the European Parliament, where you want to do something that your government does not like stopping Nord Stream or curbing Jugendamt, there are always innumerable obstacles popping up. And it turns out at the end extremely difficult to do anything about it. Even if we can do something about it, then it is ignored by your government, because your government can afford to ignore it. And this power spills over. When I talk to some of my German colleagues here, I usually hear them sermonizing. That's very common here in this chamber. I would say I hear them pontificating from the position of heavyweight moral champions, which they consider themselves to be. So all this is true, but in real terms, I think your political family is playing second fiddle in European politics. Interesting as your speech was, I cannot resist the feeling that 95% of what you said could have been said by a Martin Schulz, a politician now largely forgotten, but he was a big man once here, and he was pushing this chamber to the left, being seconded by the European People's Party. The truth is, Madam Chancellor, that the European Union has been hijacked by the left, which impose on it its ideology, its political agenda, even its language. To personalize it somewhat, we just hear Mr. Bullmann of the Socialists and Mr. Weber of the EPP. If you cut out 2 or 3 sentences from what Mr. Bullmann said, they could have exchanged the speeches, or nobody would have seen the difference. I can say more. I can imagine Mr. Bullmann being the chairman of the EPP, and Mr. Weber being the chairman of the Socialists. It would. And it wouldn't make the slightest difference either. I would say more. I can imagine Mr. Verhofstadt taking both positions. And it wouldn't make difference, perhaps the only difference being there will be more insults flying around. But so much for diversity. The immigration crisis, which cost you so dearly, Madam Chancellor, is just the tip of the iceberg. I will not be telling you about the tradition of German Christian democracy. You know more about it than I do. But what happened to it? Where has it evaporated? The portrait of Konrad Adenauer in your office is not enough. Where is your Christian democratic vision of what Europe should be like? Why is it that you and your political family passively observe as the EU has been turning into a political bulldozer of social engineering? This creeping centralization, these so-called harmonizations through the back door, more and more obscure power structure. The more big institution you make, the more power structures become obscure. I mean, that's an elementary truth about politics. Everybody knows about it. The abysmal arrogance of the EU official. The awful ideology oozing from almost every document written in a horrible newspeak, new strange institutions, chronic violation of the treaties, all this supposedly leading us to a radiant future of Europe. But this radiant... Could I please continue? Thank you. But this radiant future is a left-wing fantasy, and I do not want to live in a left-wing fantasy. And I'm sure, Madam Chancellor, you do not want to live there either, even if it is ruled by heavyweight moral champions.
Per il gruppo della...
For ALDE, Mr. Verhofstadt.
Mr. Legutko criticized us because we have from time to time the same pro-European opinion, Mr. Bullmann, Mr. Weber and myself. Well, I'm proud on this pro-European majority that exists in this House, Mr. Legutko. I'm proud on that, to make part of this meeting. You have spoken 6 minutes and I don't know even what your position is in the meanwhile, in these 6 minutes. The only thing what I know is that you are against Europe, but that was not new. That's every time when you interfere. Chancellor, the last time that in Europe a university was closed, that happened 75 years ago. That was in November 1943. That happened in Norway, where the University of Oslo was closed, and officially because a part of the building was burned. But the reality was that the occupying Nazi authorities were determined to suppress the continuous calls for autonomy and for academic freedom by the authorities of the university. That happened 75 years ago. I tell you this story, Mrs. Merkel, because within 2 weeks' time from now, and that will be on the 1st of December, the same risk to happen in our own European Union again. This time, not in Oslo, but in Budapest, in Hungary, where a reputed university, the Central European University, the CEU, will be forced to close its doors, and everybody knows why. Because it is a part of a personal crusade, even full of coded anti-Semitism, of a man, of Mr. Orban, against another man, the founder of the university, namely Mr. Soros. I have a question to you. My question is, when will you and your colleagues in the Council put finally an end to such shameful and scandalous behaviour in a value of the European Union. And I ask you this question not to make it difficult to you, but I ask you this question because I firmly believe that more than migration, and that's an important issue, more than the next financial crisis, more even than Putin, I think that this threat from within that undermines today the European Union. And we got already a fatal division in the past between North and South during the Euro crisis. We got already this wound of Brexit that still is a wound. And we risk now even a more devastating split between the East and the West. In fact, a little bit going back to the Iron Curtain and to the Berlin Wall. And allow me to say, because I want now to come to the role of Germany in the European Union, because it's about the future of the European Union we talk, that since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany, we have made progress, the euro for example, Jean-Claude, but not so much more. Because since the reunification of Germany, dear colleagues, Germany, it's true, became the most powerful member state of the Union, most powerful in population, most powerful in economic wealth, but naturally with more economic power, with more political power comes also more responsibility. And certainly European responsibility. And precisely there, I think that since 1990, Germany hasn't always assumed fully this bigger responsibility, if I may say so. In a certain way, I understand also what happened, as the country was preoccupied with something so historical and so emotional as the reunification of the country, the integration of a bankrupt communist state in the Bundesrepublik. And that was an enormous endeavour. By doing so, all the energy, all the efforts went in this gigantic task. But by doing so, and that's my point, my message that I want to give, Chancellor, by doing so, the more traditional, the more, how I call it, the post-war German ambition, so typical for Adenauer, so typical for Genscher, so typical for Kohl to build always an ever closer union on this continent, lost traction, lost also energy. The debate in Germany on Europe, if I may say so, and it is not a criticism, it's a fact, narrowed far too much to a discussion about what? About Kompetenzabgrenzung. I remember such many of the discussions with your predecessor, Mr. Schröder. Or about Steuern. That was the debate in Germany. Steuern. Taxes, belastingen, if you don't. Steuern, yeah. So 2 weeks ago, Chancellor, you announced that after this mandate, you will quit politics. But let me encourage you to use, nevertheless, the period and the coming months and the coming years. And why? Well, to do and to put Germany back on track, I think, towards this ever closer union. And I think your intervention of today is certainly a step in that direction. We need a leap forward again with Europe. We need the relaunch of the project so that we can face the challenges of the world of tomorrow. And it will be a world in which, in a certain way, we will be on our own, facing the Chinese, facing the Indians, facing the Russians, and sometimes facing the Americans when it concerns trade, for example, in their war. So, Mrs. Merkel, and that will be my conclusion, you can do that. We know your strength. We know your courage. We have seen that courage during the migration crisis. You have a unique chance to achieve it now, to make this leap forward in Europe. Why unique? Because there is a president of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, who is also a convinced European. Not in the traditional French approach. You know what the traditional French approach is? Vive l'Europe, pourvu qu'elle est française. Hein? Not in that way. He outlined in his Sorbonne speech a European project, and my message to you, to both of you in fact, is embrace this vision, join forces, revive the European dream, as mirrored in that emotional image of both of you, of 3-4 days ago, in Compiègne, holding each other in a tender but powerful embrace. I know it's time. You showed there that the whole world... I'm going to wait, President, for my last phrase. You showed there, Mrs. Merkel, for the whole world how immensely beautiful also this common European project is. And I wish you a lot of success in this.
Vi prego di rispettare.
Could I please call on speakers to respect the allocated time? Because if the first spokesperson for a group speaks at too much length, there won't be so much time for the other representatives of the group. Ska Keller.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to Strasbourg and making time to participate in this debate on the future of Europe. I would like to pick up on where Mr. Verhofstadt left off, because I'd like to recall also what a huge gesture of reconciliation you have demonstrated in recent days. You, with Mr. Macron, have recalled that we had the armistice in 1918, and that armistice was would put an end to one of the world's greatest catastrophes. And with that, the European Union is the world's greatest peace project, and we have brought down walls across Europe, unifying people, achieving freedom and democracy, and we've got rid of the blinkered thoughts that characterize the past. And for us Greens, this is very much close to our heart. We want a unified Europe, a Europe that is one for all of us, where we can constructively build our future. We want one that protects human rights, that has the rule of law, and that defends all of these things adequately. We have to stand up against the enemies of democracy and of nationalism. We also want to make sure that people have jobs and have prospects for the future. We want a Europe that makes sure that the tech giants are just as taxed as others, and we want to stick up for peace in the world, not export weapons to Saudi Arabia. We want a Europe which is leading the way on climate protection and underpins our fundamental values. And the future in that respect lies in your hands, Chancellor, but unfortunately your government keeps stepping on the brake when it comes to Europe. What about the climate crisis? This is perhaps the greatest crisis of our times, and the World Climate Summit has brought this to our attention once again. In a few weeks' time, we have a duty to make this point, but the objectives that we have put in place are simply not going to be sufficient. And there are two things that we have to do. We have to bring in a minimum price for CO2. Some member states are already wondering whether they could do that together. I wonder whether Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, government will agree to that. We need to reduce the car fleet CO2 emissions, but unfortunately in Council the ambitious goals have been buried because of the Germans, and the climate isn't going to be saved by vague pictures of glaciers and statements. We need ambitious goals for Europe, and we need them to be implemented rapidly, and that's why the German government has to stop hitting the brakes on climate policy. This is a real catastrophe for Europe, for the coast, for our island states, and for the whole planet. And Germany is certainly not the only country in the EU that is having a problem facing up to the reality of the climate, but it is the biggest one, and it has the farthest reaching consequences. The fact that Germany keeps violating environmental legislation just underscores that problem. Protecting the climate with new energy will also help us towards the goal of energy independence. A gas pipeline from Russia to Germany will make us dependent on fossil fuels, and will also damage prospects in the Ukraine, and will perhaps benefit nobody other than Mr. Schröder and Mr. Putin. One further example, the Eurozone. We know now that the Eurozone isn't as stable as it should be, and we've known that for 8 years. What's happened? We've got half a banking union, we've got a bit of a stability pact, and I'm sorry, we've got a little bit of an investment fund. It could grow bigger, but it's simply not enough. We've seen cuts in social expenditure, and this isn't going to lead to a strengthening but a splitting of Europe. This House has said what needs to be done. The Commission President has made proposals, and the French President too. You don't have to like all of them, but simply sticking your head in the sand and hoping things will sort themselves out is actually a failure to face responsibilities. Why not get together with Mr. Macron and the other colleagues around the table and come up with a reform proposal for the Eurozone? Why does Germany not speak out? It's something that affects the whole Union. Then tax justice. Once again, the German government is blocking with the Netherlands, Austria and others who support and have tax havens remaining in the EU are blocking this and making it possible for people to exploit tax loopholes with 70 billion euros a year evading the treasuries, and we have to stop blocking progress. So we need to stick up for a stable Eurozone, a protection of the climate and tax fairness. And if the biggest state is hitting the brakes, then we're not making any progress. We need somebody to speak up for Europe. Now, you said that it would be worthwhile Europe making an effort, and if so, then you need to act now. Otherwise you will not be true to your words. We need impetus. We need people to move forward. We need symbols, we need practical examples, and we need to be bold. Thank you.
Per il gruppo confederale.
Confederal Group of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left, Ms. Zimmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Chancellor, 100 years after the end of the First World War and more than 60 years after the signature of the Treaties of Rome, which we celebrated last year, the process of European integration ought to be more far advanced than it is. We should have overcome this national sentiment and selfishness, and this should be a thing of the past, as should bloodshed. But I'm not sure that this does go so much without saying now. When we talk about needing to breathe new life into the European dream, I say yes, but please in such a way as that dream does not become a nightmare. And I want to return to some of the points that I would like to stress on behalf of my group, because we see reality somewhat differently from what you have described. Chancellor, you know that we talk about resurrection out of the ruins, turn to the future. Our motto should be never again war. We should be creating peace with fewer weapons. We should be forging our swords into plowshares. This means that we should be opposed to any kind of rearmament, any kind of arms race at any time. In your 13 years as Chancellor of Germany, I'm afraid I have to ask you, what have you done in order to ensure that German and European arms exports do not export to areas in conflict? In doubt, it's always the interests of the arms businesses that take precedent over the need to protect peace and human rights. And I will also disagree with you on another point and say clearly, please don't follow Macron down the road to a European army, to a military union. Bear in mind that some other EU countries sit with a finger more happily on the trigger than Germany should ever be happy with. We have strong peace movements in Germany, in Europe. The Greens, the Left, the Social Democrats have worked hard to maintain our special attitude towards non-military policy, and we have to protect that. We need to do everything we can to stop the superpowers tearing up arms agreements. non-proliferation agreements. We need to ensure that no European weapons are delivered to conflict areas. And we call on you, finally, to allow the social union to be established. It's wrong what you said some years ago, which is that social policy is the preserve of national governments. If we do not manage to create the social dimension of the EU, a social union instead of a military union, then it is possible that far-reaching consequences will happen, not just Brexit. And I don't want to see that. As Chancellor for the Climate, you have an important role to play. It's a question of minimum standards, minimum ecological standards. We call on you to overcome the deadlock in the Council. All the things that have been said about that are very important. And can I also point out that we expect that the federal government, when it comes to the country-by-country reporting, should play a different role. It's a question of stopping tax evasion, tax fraud, stopping big multinationals evading tax altogether so that we can use that money for things that are desperately needed. You've talked about the community method, which involves the Parliament, but that has been replaced by the intergovernmental method, and that's partly due to you. And so we call on you to reverse that. Please do what you can to ensure that the European Parliament can share responsibility for these important tasks, that not everything should depend on what agreements can be struck between two member states, one of whom is perhaps dependent on the other. That doesn't strengthen democracy, and that doesn't strengthen trust. As regards the way we treated Greece, there is no excuse for that, Madam. And even if Wolfgang Schäuble was perhaps playing the role of Mephisto in all of this, you allowed yourself to be misled, taken off the right path with regard to Greece. The austerity policy, the dictates of cuts, that was following the advice of Mephisto. The results were an erosion of social standards and fundamental rights in Greece, and that led to an enormous loss of confidence in Europe as a result. So please correct that. We need to put an end to any kind of austerity policies, and with a view to Italy, I can only recommend this. Yes, there was a proposal from the Bundesbank to force the rich to pay off Italy's debts. That's good. That's redistribution from the rich to the poor. Let's implement that everywhere. Then we don't have to ask ourselves the question of whether that's possible under the Maastricht Treaty or the Fiscal Compact. That would give us a good basis to make funds available for education, for social progress, for more of the things that we need. And on refugees, you won a great deal of recognition worldwide for the position that you took on keeping the borders open. But then why are you closing your eyes to the people drowning on a daily basis in the Mediterranean? You also need to be committed to ensuring that we have legal means of migration so that we can offer solidarity, that we as a European Union can actually put in practice the values that we preach. Thank you.
For the Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy Group, Mr. Farage.
Well, Mrs. Merkel, many of my Eurosceptic colleagues have been booing you this morning, but they shouldn't be in a way, because the British should be cheering you. Without you, we'd never have made it over the line with Brexit, and I want to thank you very much for that. And of course, many of these Eurosceptic groups on the right, the centre and the left will come back here after the next European elections in huge numbers directly as a result of your immigration and asylum policy. Your we can cope led to a huge migrant tide, indeed a stampede, that came across the Mediterranean. Young men coming from very different cultures who were not going to integrate. Young men, none of whom would have qualified as being genuine refugees. And I think in many ways we looked at it in the referendum and we said we don't want to be part of an increasingly German-dominated European Union, and we certainly don't want to pay the price for Mrs. Merkel's errors. And I believe, having heard you today and listening to senior French politicians over the last couple of days, that for us leaving the European Union is now indeed a liberation. It's a European Union that we're told is now to become an empire, a militarised European Union, an undemocratic European Union, a European Union that seeks to continually expand to the east, a European Union that has launched a new Cold War against the United States of America, a European Union that tries to rewrite history. And I think 100 years on from the armistice, we should be genuinely worried. The idea that this new militarised union is somehow a recipe for peace, I suggest you all sit back and think a little bit more carefully. Maybe you should all reread history. The European project was set up to stop German domination. What you've seen today is a naked takeover bid. So I think Brexit becomes a necessity after this. And for the rest of the countries, Mrs Merkel, you've had a long, successful career. But your political decision to open up the doors unconditionally is the worst decision we've seen in post-war politics in Europe. Is it not time for you at last to admit that you were wrong? Is it not time for you to say to German communities and many others, I'm sorry for what I've done to you and the problems I've inflicted upon you for many decades to come?
For the Europe of Nations and Freedom Group, Mr. Pretzel.
Chancellor, President, colleagues. I think we're unified by many things in Europe, but we seem to be separated also. We are home to a family which is characterized by a successful economic model and scientific model. And Chancellor, you are the past of Europe, and you are saying also adieu today. And I think it's rather strange, therefore, to tell us something about the future, because this isn't an empire. This is a union of nation states. We've had misuse of the economic criteria, we've had the bank problems, we've had all sorts of issues, and in all of that you've had a rather naive and childlike morality about economic responsibility that has to be taken. German policy has characterized European traffic and transport policy with its coal policy and nuclear policy, and been rather naive about saving resources. The German government policy has Christian identity at its base, and the removal of children from the biological parents, removing them from the classic role of parents to bring up their own children, and you, in all of that, have been rather naive in violating the Christian principle of the family and the laws of nature. German government policy has faced up to and tolerated a huge migratory flow, and it started off with one thing, but ended up with a loss of control of the state systems, the security system, the social system, and the population. And you've been rather naive in your morality when it comes to the cohesion within society and the ability of Europe to deal with this. Merkel, every person has to act in a moral way. Many people have done it. Many German Europeans have done so, and other Europeans as well, in saving resources. But if you don't demonstrate tolerance to living outside of the classic family, when people are being protected when they're fleeing, that's all very well and good. But if you have a state which says that any way of living together is a family, that provides support for that, then this is crazy thinking, and it pretty much allows everything, and at the end of the day, nothing. And if Europe isn't to fall apart and is to be a model for success, then economic and social policy must not be planned on the back of an envelope down the pub. We need to think in not latte macchiatos and all the rest of that, but we need to think about the home and not have it dictated by gender professors. External borders and Christian underpinnings are what need to be at the base of it. So we need to take responsibility for identity, Christian identity, and science. Your heritage, what you will leave behind, is the destruction of institutions. There are two unions in Germany which will leave in a bad way. It will be up to others to put them back together. Now, you're saying nice things, but I can put it to you that Europe will once again be free and conservative. Thank you very much.
La parola all'onorevole Sonneborn.
Mr. Sonneborn on behalf of the non-attached members.
Vielen Dank, Präsident.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Chancellor, I have to apologise. I didn't prepare a speech. I only requested speaking time because otherwise it would have been given to Udo Voigt from the NPD. Just a minute, let me speak. And I despise non-serious small parties representing less than 1%. So I haven't got much to say. The last time we saw you was when we took leave of Helmut Kohl. Now we're saying goodbye to you. I have to say to you that you seemed nicer and nicer when well, the more I look at the CDU people who are going to be your successors, the nicer you appear to me. And please give us back our country, nice and clean, well swept. You can go now. Thank you very much.
Ora, per le prime risposte.
So, for first responses, Chancellor Merkel.
Mr. President, let me start by expressing thanks to colleagues who have expressed their views and replied to my speech, to Manfred Weber and Jean-Claude Juncker, who both mentioned the topic of Great Britain. Let me say, certainly as I see it, I think it is extremely important the spirit in which we deal with the leaving of Great Britain and accept it and determine it. I accept the decision of the people of Great Britain. It must be respected, and Michel Barnier and Jean-Claude Juncker are to be thanked because I think the spirit in which we are setting about this will decide for decades the way in which we will be able to have a partnership. And UK has shown via Theresa May that they wish to be part of Europe. It will come down to having shares of cooperation, areas where we can cooperate, and that is exactly what we want to do. I'm saying that certainly as far as the German government is concerned. Now let me pick up some of the topics that were mentioned. One topic which I think Mr. Legutko is important is the fact that Germany is a country with 80 million citizens and is economically strong, and perhaps we have to be a little bit more careful than others when we represent our own interests. But we do have interests, and we do not agree with everybody always, and neither do you with us. Let me point out that there's about 90 cases for the European Court of Justice, and we have accepted all of the judgments, even the ones that didn't suit us. And we know that there are differences of opinion. My friends in the EPP are of a different opinion than I am on Nord Stream. I think when it comes to what we do about climate change, we will be using more gas, and in a country such as Germany that is not going to have nuclear power at all in some years' time and is concentrating on renewable energy for the future and is making a very considerable contribution to protecting the climate in that way, but that we know at the same time if we're going to leave coal behind, we're going to use gas for a bridging period, and the gas imports need to be diversified. But we won't exclude Russia as a source, and I'm very keen to ensure that Ukraine as a transit country doesn't come off badly, but whether it comes via Ukraine or North Stream or South Stream, these are Russian gas molecules, and Europe won't be able to be independent of Russian gas. It needs to diversify its sources. So Germany is going to be building an LNG terminal so that we will be able to deal with other possibilities for gas imports if some of the others dry up. But we are going to be getting out of nuclear, we're going to be stopping coal. We do need renewable energy, but also a part of that needs to be gas for a period. Secondly, the community method and the intergovernmental method, these have been mentioned. I would like to say that the community method, as far as Germany is concerned, has always been strengthened and will always be strengthened. But in the European Council at the moment, we're in a situation where it's almost a motto that the European treaties can never ever be changed. Let me be frank with you, that if you're going to align yourself with that thinking, then Europe is going to become sclerotic. We have a community which faces new challenges and must react to them, and must therefore be able to face the future with treaties that can be changed. And I simply do not accept and cannot understand that you would have a motto that you would never change the treaties. But if you wish to act in a European way, and the treaties don't give you the power to do that, and I've always said that the ESM needs to be in the Eurozone protocol of the Lisbon Treaty, it's not down to Germany. We could do that tomorrow. But it's not very easy to get a majority in the European Council for that. And if we can't do that, then as a pre-stage to being able to act jointly, we need the intergovernmental approach, and it would have been far worse in the currency union if we'd not had that. So the one does not exclude the other, and I am pleading expressly that we don't take treaty change as an end in itself, but we do not exclude it and saying we'll never ever change our own constitutions back home, because were we to do that, then this would be a dereliction of our duty as a nation state. That brings me on to the point that was mentioned by quite a few groups and would appear to be mutually exchangeable. You know as well as I do that this is the case, but if you've got a constitution or a basic law, as we do in Germany, then you have to have two-thirds majority for it to be adopted, and nevertheless, whenever you set about legislating on the basis of it, you get disputes. And if it's to do with the basis of the European Union, well, fortunately in this House there is a large group which agrees on the basics, the foundations. That's what you need, and then you can get into intensive debate about how you put the basic principles together. But whenever we talk about those principles, there is fortunately always a majority. Now, what role is to be played by Germany? You want us to do two things at one and the same time. You want us to be visionary and lead the way with France, for example, but of course also guarantee that the vision is close to reality. So the European Council with 28 and future 27 will adopt things unanimously. Now that is a tension between vision and feasibility between member states. And that must not be a growing gulf. At some point you have to enter into the realm of reality and achievability. And maybe when it comes to the setting of objectives, I may be somewhat reticent, but then there are people back home that want us to ensure that what we say is ultimately what we implement, and it is out of respect for the individual member states. When weighing up what is to be done, I have to think about the possible, trying to factor all of that into my thinking. Otherwise, visions and my own conceptualization, and I've been talking just a moment ago about changing the treaties, so that could be a vision, and reality is a growing gulf. And as far as I'm concerned, Germany has always played a role in bridging that, having ambitious goals, but at the same time making sure that there is respect for others who do not always wish to pursue the same things, and that is also part of what this EU is. A word now on migration. I've also got a limited speaking time, so let me move on to that. Migration. Now, we are all proud of our values. This is what Europe has been founded upon. Article 1 of our basic law in Germany talks about the inalienable nature of human dignity. But on our doorstep there's a terrible civil war and there's a huge challenge facing us with IS and Islamist terror. And Mrs. Zimmer, let me just give you one example in G7 to illustrate what the German government was thinking about when we supported the Peshmerga with weapons to avoid a genocide. And we decided that we would support them. And I think that was the right decision, even if it was not an easy decision to make. And I will continue by saying this. We have a close migration partnership that's been established with Niger. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. There are terrorists coming in from Mali because of the failure of the international community in Libya. They have armed with weapons, the terrorists in Boko Haram from Nigeria as well, and the president of Niger. We say we could imagine training them, we could imagine doing some expenditure, but when it's a question of arming them to be able to fight the terrorists, well, Germany, I'm afraid, is not going to be part of that. The World Bank is not part of it. And we in the European Development Aid community have all stuck our heads in the sand. We don't get anywhere with that, and I think it's always better if African soldiers are prepared to fight their own terrorists, and we support them, but that's the way it has to be done. Now we say, well, our French friends will deal with that. That's just not honest. Now, further on migration, there's been a civil war. There's still a civil war in Syria. There's terrorist Islam. And we've got 6 million refugees from Syria and Iraq. And maybe 6 or 7 million people in Lebanon have been taken in by Lebanon and Jordan. And we said at the start of the legislature, and I think I got this wrong, we didn't pay sufficient attention to people having at least $1 for eating and some form of education in these refugee camps. And the refugees came to us because they needed to save their lives. And now the whole of Europe, 500 million people, have said in the face of the 6 million Syrians, Iraqis, we've taken 1.15 million, and we've helped them in a very dramatic situation where many Europeans were helped in a similar way in previous times. Do you really think that that is something which has put us in a position of being unable to act? Obviously, we must ensure that where you've got illegal migration, people spending all their money on traffickers, that we don't end up there. This is why we entered into the agreement with Turkey. This has been much criticized. It was precisely to try and turn illegal migration into legal migration. The UNHCR has said the people that we should be helping, that was our common goal, but we weren't adequately prepared, and we've had to learn from that. So we founded Frontex, we've got the Sophia project, we've got a partnership with Africa, we've built up the Coast Guard of Libya in Palermo. There's a Libya conference, and my only desire is that we would have a uniform Libya policy in Europe so that the people don't get 2 different stories being told to them. But there where we have not been sufficiently committed, we can actually learn from the past, and I think now we need to look up, say we've learned from our mistakes, we will do it differently, and this partnership with Africa is precisely part of that. Let me round off with climate protection. I've just said a little about gas. We've got very ambitious climate objectives, and we will be trying to attain those objectives, and in 2030 we really do need to make sure that we've attained those goals. We've got the climate legislation in place, as Mrs. Keller well knows. let me say that it was Wolfgang Schäuble in the G20 under the presidency of Germany who tackled tax avoidance, tried to put together a BEPS international agreement, and this is precisely now what's being implemented, and I think Germany has paid a very important contribution in bringing that about.
Iniziamo il Catch the Eye, vi riprego.
So, Catch the Eye. Now, please do respect the 1 minute speaking time each. At 5:20, 5:22, I shall be interrupting the Catch the Eye procedure in order to give the floor to Chancellor Merkel for her to respond, because we have to finish this entire session by 5:30. Mr. Caspary.
Au revoir, Monsieur le Président de la Commission européenne.
Well, goodbye to the President of the Commission.
La parola all'onorevole Caspary.
Mr. Caspary.
Sehr geehrte Frau Bundeskanzlerin.
Chancellor, thank you very much for having held the European Union together with us over the last 13 years, and I think this discussion has shown how important that is. In the preparation for today's meeting, we have seen socialists blaming you on Twitter for the fact that some European countries haven't overcome the consequences of the euro crisis, of course, which is partly due to the mistaken policies of the socialists. We Christian Democrats have done our best to stabilize the situation in Spain and Portugal and in Ireland with solidarity and prudence, and we think that we have you to thank for the role that you and your government played in these crucial years. Second point, Guy Verhofstadt touched on a number of issues. In 2004, he was the Spitzenkandidat for the Liberals. 2014 he was again in that process. Now he wants to stop it. We're grateful to you for your support to Manfred Weber, because I think the Spitzenkandidat process brings more democracy into the European elections and into the European institutions.
Androulakis.
Androulakis.
Onorevole Androulakis.
Λάρια, έχετε συνδέσει το όνομά σας με τη διαχείριση δύο.
Thank you. You said that you had managed 2 crises and that following the euro area crisis and the migration crisis there was now stability. You took unilateral decisions moving away from the acquis communautaire. We need to share our fears and act together. We've seen more fear growing during your own period in power, and the only people who benefited from that were Eurosceptics and the far right. So I would like to ask you whether you do not regret the way in which you managed the economic and financial crisis in my country, the flames that fanned. I think that although the system had many faults, you also bear some responsibility. 500,000 young people emigrated. They didn't see any solution to their problems. We still have financial problems, and many years on, after many bailouts and programs, we're not really seeing the change to society that we would have wanted.
Chancellor, thank you for coming to the European Parliament. It feels a bit like being in the Bundestag today. Now, the French President Macron wants a real EU arm, in his words, to take on the USA, as he says, Russia and China too. And the French Finance Minister, Monsieur Le Maire, believes the EU must be an empire, in his words. So do you believe, as German Chancellor, in a new single European federal superstate or in a EU empire? Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole Wikström.
Wikström.
Mr. President, thanks to you, Madam Chancellor, trust and European values is really your key message in your speech, and for that I thank you. Now, the cases of Lampedusa, of Aquarius, clearly shows that what we need in Europe today is a common European asylum system based on humanity, on European values and solidarity. Now, the Dublin file is still blocked in Council, and I would like to ask you, what can you do during days to come to unblock and enable us to deliver on a common European asylum system before the elections, so that trust and solidarity and even reconciliation can remain a core message of the European institutions? And I wish you all the best for your future, and I thank you for everything that you have done for this union.
Onorevole Monod.
Mr. Monod.
Madame la chancelière, vos 13 années de pouvoir en Allemagne.
Thank you. What you've done in Germany is to take Europe to an economic, social and cultural dislocation, and your decision, unthinking unilateral decision to open up Germany to migrants with the servile permission of Mr. Juncker has led to a situation where we have 4 million migrants, supposed refugees in the EU now since 2015. In the Schengen area, because we don't have national borders, we've seen this wave of supposed climate refugees coming into Europe, and especially into France, and this obsession with immigration in France and Germany has been disastrous for the safety of Europeans, as in Cologne and in the Bataclan in Paris. We're seeing effects on the economy as well. This obsession with budgetary rigour has led to trade surpluses at the expense of our partners in the euro area, especially France and Italy, the unemployed, purchasing power going down, especially for pensioners, including Germans. So after what you've done, Ms. Merkel, with Mr. Macron, how can you give lessons on being a European to the patriots of your country? I warn you that if you try to be the next president of the Commission, then patriots will block that. Thank you. Most Italians, following the harsh rules imposed by the EU, which I would say is partly being imposed by Germany, was rather reminiscent of the invasion of German forces, which is something that we've recently been commemorating. Italy just wants to solve its own problems by itself. Can you not offer it that gesture? It's not about declarations, but about true solidarity to 5 or 6 million Italians living in poverty because of your austerity policy. They're now living in poverty. Thank you, Chancellor.
Κυρία Μέρκελ, με τη μέχρι τώρα πολιτική σας διαδρομή και τις πράξεις σας...
Madam Merkel, the policy that you've deployed as German Chancellor, I think, has shown that you're one of the key actors in globalization and have contributed to things that have tormented Europeans. You've allowed thousands of or millions of refugees to come into Europe, and you have led the attacks against the values and principles that we hold dear as a nation. You're trying to replace and substitute states by groups who are at the service of large multinational companies. You've led a fierce fight against the Greek people, and you are responsible for the current economic and financial crisis. You're trying to take on the mantle of what is truly Greek, and you have met your end, or soon will meet your political end, and I think what will be left is the accident that you have brought about, and I do hope that you will have regrets there concerning that.
Chancellor, thank you very much for your speech and for your work, what you have been doing in the last few years. What I always wanted to highlight when your policies are discussed, I'm just here in the middle. Anyway, in EPP from Hungary. So what I wanted to point out when looking at your policies is that just before the European election it's extremely important that we send a message out to the European poor, 1/5, every fifth citizen of ours, that this is not a double-speed Europe. In Eastern Europe, poverty has to be stopped to make sure that we will be strong Europe enough to have those who you wish to see on your labour market. But there are so many Europeans waiting to be working on your labour market. So please assist the member states to use the money in the next 8 months, which is in their budget for poverty. Because it's all about 50% of the poverty money is still not used. So, and also for the next MMF, please try to make sure that there is no budget line working on poverty inside of Europe, and then we can turn to the African poverty, because we have very, very good insertion and integration models throughout Eastern Europe, but also in the Balkans, and also in your countries. I'm visiting a lot of refugee projects with Syrians, and I would like to ask you to speed up their employment, because they go crazy sitting at home for 2 years waiting to get jobs. Also on those guys who you are going to send back to Africa, please make sure that they get the same educational projects that we get in Europe, and also because you are a very big border opener, and we see you in Sopron at the European picnic very often. Please make sure that before you open up the big borders, open up the small ones, just next to Austria. Hungarian workers are standing on the border, waiting to go to work every morning for the last 3 weeks. Thank you very much.
Vi prego di rispettare I tempi.
Please do respect the time allocated. We'll take the time away from your own group. You spoke for 2 minutes, Vice President, instead of 1. Mr. Salini.
Grazie, Cancelliere.
Thank you. Chancellor, 2 comments as an Italian. Italy is proud to be a founding member of the EU. Italy wants to grow. I'm over here, standing up. So Italy wants to grow together with Europe, not against Europe. Italy is far more than its current pathetic national budget. We believe in grands œuvres. We believe in progress, investment and peace. And we believe that the continent does have the production capacity that it has believed in. The heart of Europe may be Bavaria and Lombardy, however important the port of Rotterdam is. We're producers more than we are traders. And I would like to pick up on Mr. Bullman's comments. He said that Germany cannot afford to fail on Europe. Neither can Italy. Italy cannot afford to fail, and nor can it afford to play with the peace that Europe has achieved. Ms. Hautala.
Chancellor, we are now celebrating the 70 years of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I noticed that you yourself had expressed doubts about whether such a declaration could be adopted today in the atmosphere we have. To quote you, you said, "I fear not." And I'd like to ask you how to deal with the autocrats that are surrounding the European Union, who don't care about this declaration, how to deal with the threats within that has been mentioned many times in this discussion. And I wish you said something about your own political family that seems to tolerate illiberalism and populism and nationalism. Isn't it something that we should address? Because if we don't start at home, how can we defend universal human rights in the world?
Onorevole Andrieu.
Mr. Andrieu.
Jolainen, alors. Vous êtes ici, Andrieu, c'est 29, hein?
Ja, Frau Bundeskanzlerin.
Chancellor, we come from the same region. We are familiar with the debates and the opinions prevailing in Germany. Since I've been in European politics, I've heard that Germany is the paymaster. And that we know that this can be a very toxic word. It's a sign that we're on the defensive with regard to new ideas, that we keep on saying, oh, how much is this going to cost? What would you say? What do we have to do to explain to Germans that actually we are winners from European integration? I think precisely before the European elections it would be time to go on the offensive and convince Europeans that we really benefit. I mean, not just Germans, but we benefit extraordinarily from the EU. And what about the Deposit Guarantee Fund, the Bank Recovery Fund? All of these ideas that come out of the European hat, as it were, elicit this Pavlovian reaction. This is going to cost us money. We don't want it. You've stressed solidarity, and we need to go along with that and not always refuse.
Kouloglou.
Mrs. Chancellor, I carefully listened to your speech. You said 15 times tolerance. That's very good. You said 10 times solidarity. That's very good. But you never said one word, austerity. And you know the austerity policies are the one they are undermining democracy in Europe. They are provoking anger, frustration, insecurity, and this is why the extreme left is rising. Your policies, unfortunately, are creating the Frankenstein. We need Europe. We need more Europe, but we need more social Europe. We need more justice Europe, and that's how we will have democracy. Thank you very much.
Honorable Batten.
Mr. Batten.
Madam Chancellor, the German people have been very unfortunate in their leaders. Twice already in the last 100 years they have plunged Europe into disaster. German militarism caused the First World War, destroyed the nations of Europe and ushered in communism. The Second World War brought levels of depravity never seen before in Europe. Now you're bringing about disaster for a third time. European political and economic integration is disastrous. But worse than that, you have opened up Europe's borders to untold millions of migrants. Your decision to open Europe's borders to indiscriminately import millions of people will do untold damage to European societies for generations to come. The never-ending process of European integration will destroy democratic nation-states. If Britain had a Prime Minister with any guts or backbone, we would have left long ago. Exit cannot come fast enough. Thank you.
Honorable Gollnisch.
Mr. Gollnisch.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mais j'ai appuyé sur le bouton.
Thank you. I actually pressed the button after Mr. Voigt. Can you give him the floor instead, then?
Onorevole, decido io chi deve parlare.
I give the floor. If you wish to speak, please speak. I can't change it. It's not up to you to choose who speaks.
Que tout a été fait.
Oh, well, that's a shame, because I was hoping he would speak before me. I'll be brief. Chancellor, you spoke about human rights. There are hundreds or even thousands of people in your country who are being prosecuted for their ideas. I may not agree with them. They don't agree with the dogma which has been imposed since the Second World War. A 90-year-old woman, Ursula Verbeck, has been imprisoned. She's dying. There's a man who's dying in prison now both legs with gangrene, Lawyer Ernst Mahler. So, with those two examples, Chancellor, can you not see that we're going back to the darkest days of the history of your country, the kind of dictatorships that we supposedly want to avoid now?
Dorfman.
Sir Dorfman.
Grazie Presidente che mi dà la parola.
Thank you for the floor.
Chancellor, I would underscore everything that you said today. I'm from South Tyrol, you'll be familiar with the area, and you know how important the Schengen Agreement is for us. You'll also be aware that the Brenner Pass that was closed 100 years ago was opened, and the appeal therefore comes from me. Your country has for years controlled your southern border, and when people sit in jams every day having to wait to be checked, then they will no longer believe in Europe. When people who wish to cross to go shopping or to work are going to have to sit in a jam waiting to cross once again, they're going to give up on Europe. And so I think it would be courageous if you were to stop that farce. You know that this doesn't help security. Most of these border crossing points are open, a few of them are controlled, and it's just there that the illegal traffickers are not going to go. So it's important therefore that the border controls between Germany and Austria are finally consigned to the past. Thank you.
Onorevole Radke.
Mr. Radke.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau.
Yes, Madam Chancellor, thank you very much for your excellent speech and your clear words. Your speech looked at what the range of opinions are here is even more worthy. We have to hear such a nonsense here in this hemicycle. We see that certain people who are so critical of Europe are the first to be at the bar in the morning, but your speech was even more valuable, I think, in this context. One of the important questions for the future that you mentioned, well, please add the European social market economy as a focus, because the developments that we are witnessing on the labour market, not only in Germany but throughout the European Union, really cause for concern, and I would be delighted to see you using the remaining time you have in office as Chancellor to make progress there with regard to promoting the social market economy.
Mr. Andrea.
Numero 29.
Number 29. It's you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, but my name is Tibor Sanya, if it helps you. Madam Chancellor, I was really impressed with your recent statement at the Kristallnacht commemoration, and I join your warning that political violence and extremism must be stopped at the roots, at the first sign of anti-democratic action and hate speech, before they got a chance to destroy our democracies or lives. Regarding today's dangers overshadowing the EU's future, however, I must say that you and your wider political family, the EPP, have failed in this by missing the chance to stop Fidesz and halt Orban's anti-European and anti-democratic illiberal political course based on corruption and inhuman government. But I'm a Hungarian socialist. I know our duties. But it is my urgent plea to you, Madam Chancellor, to use your full political weight in the European Council and your important leverage within your political family to help clear this picture by distanciating your party from Fidesz and condemning and hopefully ending Orban's illiberal political surge in Europe. Thank you.
Onorevole, lei ha chiesto la parola con la carta dell'onorevole.
Well, you were holding up Mr. Andrea's card, so terribly sorry, but that's what I saw. So that explains the confusion. Mr. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Frau Merkel. I would like to ask you, Madam, if you think that it's a good way to thank our American friends after liberating Europe, liberating France and helping Britain and liberating Germany, do you think it's a good way to thank them by insisting on a European army, and remarks by President Macron which were most unhelpful that were taken awry by the American President? Is this the way we should be treating them? And do you think that Mr. Putin will take any European army that does not include the Americans or the British remotely seriously? Thank you.
Onorevole Epitideios.
Mr. Epitideios.
Epitideios.
Grazie Presidente. Καλώς ήρθατε κυρία Καγκελάρια.
Thank you. Chancellor, you were talking about the future of Europe. I'm trying to work out what kind of Europe you're talking about. A Europe that engages in daily destruction? That's the kind of thing that you've been doing. I won't go through the catalogue of what you've done, but referring to Greece, you've destroyed the heritage of Greece, destroyed the Greek economy, put us into poverty. Chancellor, the ancient Greeks, when they wanted to refer to someone who was guilty of an outrage, something horrible, says the person who has hurt you will cure you. Well, I don't know whether you're aware of the crime that you've committed against Greece, but you need to cure it now. You need to cure the wound that you have caused. Compensate for that economic harm. Perhaps returning the compensation that was paid, pay compensation for the occupation period. We also have a poem that from Friedrich Schiller about a condemned Greek that you may recall.
Madame la chancelière, merci d'être parmi nous.
Thank you for coming here, Madam Chancellor. I'd like to talk about the taxation of the digital giants, and I think that there is much expectation in the minds of citizens that this should happen, because we cannot allow the most powerful to get off scot-free. There's a double standard at the heart of this, which feeds the populists. This is a real power struggle for Europe, and we have to show our citizens and the rest of the world that Europe isn't naive and that it is able to impose its rules. We need to show that we can pull together, but there's hesitation, and you yourself, Chancellor, said you're waiting for an international solution, which means that nothing will happen. This is an enormous responsibility, because taxing GAFA is one of the things that will allow us to put paid to the language of our critics. Do you have a different solution, Madam?
Mr.
Rubik.
Frau Bundeskanzler.
Chancellor, I am proud of my EPP family. On the 27th of June in 2007, in the German presidency, adopted the roaming directive here in Parliament, which we signed with Reding and Niebler, Pöttering and Barroso. So that was an achievement. At that time, we had a price per minute of 0.09 cents. Now it's 0.019. And back in 2006, under Wolfgang Schüssel, we got the first complaint that the roaming directive was the shortest one ever in terms of the time it took to adopt it. So we have helped establish the global digital market. I think we are leading in areas such as these technologies. So please help us in the multi-annual financial framework program to continue to pursue these important goals.
Mr. Zorrinho. Chancellor. Welcome to the debate on the future of Europe. 500 million citizens are at stake. But so is the planet. So is the future of the planet. Sustainability. We need to combat inequality, combat poverty, and have more trade agreements. I do agree with you on many occasions. I know that you believe in Europe, and I know that you profoundly believe in the values of Europe. And I'm sure you know that we need cohesion and internal convergence in order for Europe to be successful in the world. And for that reason, Chancellor, we need to be ambitious. We need to have a balanced monetary area with own resources in the euro area. Tolerance is the soul of Europe, as are cohesion and convergence. How can you help strengthen the euro area and the EU budget? Mr. Langer.
Thank you, Mr. President. And before I ask my question to the Chancellor, I have to get something off my chest, and it regards our colleague in seat number 20, colleague Farage. I would say to our guest, don't take his grandstanding too seriously. This is a man who actually led his country, led his party to a Brexit vote, only the next day to admit that he lied and tricked and to jump ship and leave his party. This is not leadership, it's a circus. Secondly, I'm glad you're here, Mr. Farage. Secondly, he says he doesn't want to be part of a German European Union, yet he has made sure that 2 of his children have German passports. This man wouldn't know hypocrisy if it stared him straight in the face. Und jetzt kommt meine Frage.
And now my question, which I will ask in Dutch for the people back home. Madam Chancellor, you talked about a European army. Can you explain to people in the Netherlands, can you reassure them that you're not talking about a European army, but an army of Europeans? In other words, it will remain a national decision to deploy people, but that we will certainly be working together much more closely. Thank you.
Javi Lopez.
Mr. Javi Lopez.
Gracias, presidente. Cancillera.
Thank you, President. Chancellor Merkel, you've come to visit us in the European Parliament at a very significant and critical moment in your career, and a significant and critical moment for Europe. You'll be standing down now in your party and standing down as Chancellor, so perhaps it's a good time to take stock of your time in office, but also of the last decade in the EU. There are various different ways of looking at your legacy: moral leadership, historic leadership, a pillar of stability for Europe, that's one way of looking at it, or the last person responsible for negligent economic management of sovereign debt and standing in the way of the necessary reform. So what will historians say about your legacy? I think it will depend on what happens over the next couple of years. Will you take reform of the euro area, migration, common foreign and security policy forward so that we have one single, strong, fair voice of Europe in the world, or not?
Signora Cancelliera, io ho sempre...
Chancellor, I've always appreciated the fact that you are a very dedicated person. You've always shown very strong leadership. The EU has not always shown the same. We can't have a 2 or 3 speed Europe. I think the European Parliament can play an important role in terms of the citizens' expectations. We need to be sending out the right message. People have been talking about migration, the environment, common defence policy, a European army. I think in terms of migration, the European Parliament has put forward a solution, but we're still at an impasse. I deal with international trade, and I think that the best answer that Europe can give is to help our companies, especially SMEs. Very often they don't understand the mechanisms, the language, the strategy, the objectives that the EU has. If we can get closer to our businesses, then we'll be able to give a better answer for jobs. Ms. Valenciano.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's very useful that you're coming here to Parliament, because it's clear that the Trojan horse of the EU is present here in this chamber as well. And this is precisely why we are calling on the pro-European leaders of Europe to show a little bit more firmness, to show a little bit more conviction, a little bit more strength, so that we are the ones who are pushing the European integration process forward and not let them push forward and promote the disintegration of Europe and the destruction of it. Therefore, it is a matter of urgency that you shift things forward in Council. A number of files that we've called for that are blocked. Very powerful forces have entered Europe to try to break down what we have spent so much time to build up. And you, in Germany, as we've seen today, so many Germans have taken the floor today. You have a particular responsibility to shoulder, and we hope that you succeed in your historic task.
Concludiamo.
Rosati is the next speaker. We only have 3 more speakers before we give the floor to the Chancellor again.
Mr. President, Madam Chancellor, thank you for being with us and thank you for your leadership. We appreciate very much your efforts to bring a stronger Europe. In your speech, you focused on the need to have a common foreign policy here in Europe, and I very much share your views. In this context, I would like to ask you, what should we do and how should our policy be shaped against Russia? We have still the situation in which people are dying in eastern Ukraine. We've been now in the 5th year of negotiating with Russia to implement the so-called Minsk agreements. What is the recipe for making Russia more accommodative and more willing simply to take into account our expectations? What is your recipe to confront the more and more aggressive Russia here in Europe and simply bring peace to Ukraine?
Purtroppo interrompere qui il catch the eye perché il cancelliere deve.
The Chancellor will have to leave, so I'm afraid we have to stop there and give the floor to Chancellor Merkel.
So, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Dear colleagues.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Colleagues. I think that the German Parliament would be very grateful if we were to have such long debates. I've had more than 30 questions put to me, and of course it's not possible to give a due answer to each and every one of them, particularly as I do have to leave at 5:30, as your President has said. So I can be brief. I'd like to begin by saying how happy I am, and I have expressed that happiness by quoting Mr. Hallstein. I've expressed my happiness about Manfred Weber being chosen as a Spitzenkandidat who will represent the EPP in an excellent way, as I'd like to stress, as a member of his political family. And I'd also like to state that the word Mr. Leinen used is not our view of the monetary policy. We Germans do benefit from being part of an ever closer union, from the structural funds. I was going to say nobody knows better than we do, but I am deeply convinced that when we look at our own German history of the reunification of East and West, we know how important it is that we have convergence and that we have cohesion. If we didn't have them, then of course people would not appreciate Europe. So the question is, how do we achieve this? And now there we have different political views. I'm very much in favour of the European social market economy, but this means that first I have to create wealth before I can distribute it. And if you get that out of balance, then no power in the world will help us to give people social security if we're not generating wealth first. And countries also have to take some responsibility for this. And I know how difficult that was in Greece, how difficult that was in Portugal, but the fact that we now all have growth, that we have a major program to fight youth unemployment, the fact that employment agencies in Europe are working together. The fact that we are providing professional training to many young people from Greece in Germany, this has to be the spirit. If we want to create decent jobs, worthwhile jobs, then we can build up a good solid Europe, and the same applies to Italy. We want to extend a hand to Italy. I say this clearly. Italy is a founding member of the Union, but Italy also agreed to all sorts of rules that we have as the basis for action in Europe, and so they can't just tear them up and say we're not interested in this anymore. The Commission here, of course, has an important role, and I hope that solutions will be found. That is my passionate wish, and I have expressed this to Prime Minister Conte. And as regards the criticism from Hungary, Viktor Orban, when there were many refugees in Hungary, asked Werner Faymann, the Austrian Chancellor, who then asked me on a particular day whether we were ready to help Hungary to take in some refugees. And I think that is an episode in the history of migration that we should remember. Should we have left Greece alone with all of those refugees in a difficult economic situation? Should we have left the Western Balkans in dire straits, left them alone and dealing with this influx of refugees? Or should we say in such a situation we have an agreement with Turkey to help us to protect our external border, but we have to share responsibility, we have to share the burden. And in 2015, Hungary wasn't able to protect its external border. I never called on Hungary to assume that role of protecting the border. I just saw for myself that they weren't able to do so, and because they were not able to do so, others jumped in to help them out. But then to find myself being criticized and represented as having done something that was irresponsible, I now find very strange, and I think that is also part of the historical picture that should be set straight. And now, one point on the question of the two-speed Europe. I feel that there are many countries from Central and Eastern Europe who are very worried about this idea of a two-speed Europe. A two-speed Europe would be a Europe in which member states can decide whether or not they wish to cooperate on a certain subject or not. The Schengen area is not something that binds all member states. That was a decision freely taken. Not everybody has introduced the euro yet. We can't say to Hungary and Poland that they have to introduce the euro now if they don't want to. And that is why there already is a Europe of varying speeds. But what is more important, there shouldn't be a closed shop. You should never have an initiative which would be only, say, for France and Germany and 3 others, that would not be open to everybody. Every initiative has to be open to everybody. Then it's okay. Well, we already have a Europe of 2 speeds. And finally, to Ms. Valenciano, I would just like to briefly say, you know, we have 2 ways of going about things broadly. Some people believe that by working together we can solve, not all problems, but many problems, we can solve them better. Not all problems have to be dealt with in the European Parliament, but many problems can be addressed by working together. And there's another group in the Parliament who doesn't believe that. They sit here every day in order to make their point clear that member states could do this better on their own. So it's not a question of saying, you must do this, you must do that. I think all of those who are convinced that essentially the multilateral project of Europe, of European unification, was the right answer to the lessons of history, is the right answer to the challenges of the future, all of those people must stand shoulder to shoulder in this conviction and work together in a respectful way with one another to find solutions. And that is the spirit in which I will continue to work.
Thank you very much.